Hi, I'm Kristen Goodwin. On this episode of the Fox News Rundown, presumptive Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden choosing former rival California Senator Kamala Harris to be his running mate, making her the first black woman and first South Asian American woman on a major party ticket. But will Biden's pick prompt President Trump to change his re-election strategy? Trump 2020 National Press Secretary Hogan Gidley weighs in on this and shares his insights on the Democrats' selection. And for nearly 25 years, Nancy Grace has been on television discussing crime and fighting for victims' rights. The former prosecutor has a new Fox Nation special called American Kidnapping, Finding Elizabeth Smart with Nancy Grace. She joins the Rundown to discuss what she's learned about the Smart case and shares her thoughts on the allegations against Jeffrey Epstein's former associate, Ghislaine Maxwell. Plus commentary by Washington Times opinion editor and Fox News contributor Charlie Hurt. The Fox News Rundown is a daily news podcast where we take a deeper look at the stories important to you. You can subscribe on your favorite podcast player by going to foxnewspodcast.com.
I'm Jason Chaffetz.
I'm Katie Pavlich.
I'm Steve Ducey, and this is the Fox News Rundown.
Wednesday, August 12th, 2020. I'm Lisa Brady. The new Biden-Harris team isn't changing the focus for the Trump campaign, which wants voters tuned to the top of the ticket.
They can see a charlatan from a mile away, and that's what Joe Biden is. And so we're going to remind the American people just how far left Joe Biden has gotten.
I'm Chris Foster. Nancy Grace takes a new look at Elizabeth Smart's kidnapping 18 years ago.
It gets me so distraught. But the more we look at the crime and the more we look at the way it happened, we find out more and more and more details.
And I'm Charlie Hurt. I've got the final word on the Fox News Rundown.
Joe Biden didn't just pick a running mate. The presumptive Democratic nominee made history. California Senator Kamala Harris, about to become the first black woman or South Asian on a major party's presidential ticket, months after ending her own run for president. Fellow Senator and former candidate Amy Klobuchar telling Fox's Bret Baier,
I'm so happy for her, and she will be a great running mate because she's got the experience to serve as vice president, to work side by side with Joe Biden, to have people's back. She ran literally the biggest Justice Department in the country next to the Department of Justice.
Harris was California's attorney general and a prosecutor before running for Senate. Biden calls her a fearless fighter for the little guy and one of the country's finest public servants. And Harris says Biden can unify the American people. But she had a viral moment during an NBC debate at his expense.
Do you agree today that you were wrong to oppose busing in America then?
No,
do you agree?
I did not oppose busing in America. What I opposed is busing ordered by the Department of Education.
Challenging Biden's record on civil rights.
She said things during the debates, during the Democrat primary debates, that were horrible about Sleepy Joe.
President Trump says he's surprised by the choice.
She was very disrespectful to Joe Biden, and it's hard to pick somebody that's that disrespectful.
The Trump campaign calls her phony Kamala and part of a Joe Biden surrender to a radical mob.
Well, people vote for the top of the ticket, and poll after poll shows that.
Hogan Gidley is national press secretary for the Trump campaign.
What's interesting about Joe Biden is he is an empty vessel, and sooner or later, empty vessels have to be filled by something. And in this particular instance, Joe Biden's move to the radical socialist left is finally complete. He has been embracing these radical ideas of government takeover of health care, the Green New Deal, defunding the police, restructuring law enforcement. Those are things he's been talking about and has finally embraced them in this pick with Kamala Harris. That being said, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's still all about Joe Biden. He's the one at the top of the ticket. What should be noted, though, is that Joe Biden also has mentioned he's a transitional candidate. So there's no guarantee he's going to run for a second term, meaning he has selected someone from this radical base, and chances are, he's going to govern that way. I mean, the Democrat Party has moved so far left, and while Joe Biden may be the face, it's the Kamala Harrises of the world who are the heart of this radical movement. And so they are clearly two peas in a pod. It looks like they're going to run a radically left campaign on radically left issues to try and remake this country into the image of a socialist nation. They've been pretty open and obvious about it. So we'll see where it goes from here.
Kamala Harris, though, has actually faced some criticism from the left for being too tough on crime when she was Attorney General. So does picking her help to counter President Trump's message that Biden is beholden to the radical left and not tough enough amid, the unrest in American cities?
Well, it's interesting you mention that because she also used that office to inflate her conviction rate, too. And so two things can be true at once. She may have tried to inflate her toughness back then, but now where we are and the radical moves of the left proves that, she's just phony. And what she's trying to say now is we should defund the police and we should restructure law enforcement. Take a look at that. So it's pretty clear her move to embrace radical leftist ideology is now complete as well. And so that's where the Democrat Party's base is. That's where they're going to try and move. And, typically in campaigns, what's so interesting is you run to the far reaches of your party to try and win and secure the nomination. Then you work to moderate. Here, it's almost been the exact opposite. Joe Biden tried to pretend as though he was a moderate during the primary. Now he has embraced the full-on radical agenda of the left. And so someone like Kamala Harris, who is going to try and sell the American people she's somehow tough on crime when in fact she's the one who wants to allow the defunding of the police and putting our American people and our communities and our citizenry at risk. That's going to be a tough sell.
Though Biden keeps saying he is not for defunding police. He's said that numerous times. He keeps saying it.
Hold on. There's a big difference there because what he says is when he was asked, can't we all agree we need to redirect funding? He said, yes, absolutely. And if you don't think redirect is the same thing as defund, then I'd like to redirect your next paycheck into my bank account. It's all the same thing. The semantic games the press are trying to do to cover for Joe Biden's record, to cover for Joe Biden's misstatements, to cover for Joe Biden's massive embrace of these leftist policies, it's not going to work. The American people see through that. They can see a charlatan from a mile away, and that's what Joe Biden is. And so we're going to remind the American people just how far left Joe Biden has gotten.
The president has been predicting a big rebound in the third quarter report just before Election Day on the economy. What if that report right before Election Day is not good or not as good as he's hoping it'll be?
Well, I don't want to get into hypotheticals, but while we do play the hypothetical game, let me do that. As we're coming out of coronavirus and trying to get this country back on track economically, the last 3 months, consecutive months, have been the largest job gains in the history of this country. And our president, who rebuilt this economy once, is rebuilding it again. And what's interesting about your question is, as we play the hypothetical game, what if Joe Biden were to get elected as we're trying to rebound out of coronavirus with a plan to increase taxes by $4 trillion on the American people, by granting amnesty to more than 11 million illegal aliens, flooding the job market, preventing Americans from getting jobs first as the jobs start to come back. And I always like to say, you don't have to guess how an economy would look under these two men. You've seen it. 3 years under President Donald Trump, 500,000 manufacturing jobs coming back into this country, more jobs than there were people to fill them, incredible trade deals that protected the American worker, cutting taxes, deregulation. And we saw Joe Biden's economy for 8 years, too. 60,000 manufacturing plants closed, 3.5 million jobs, leaving American citizens going directly to China, 850,000 jobs gone because of his horrible NAFTA deal. So when you look at the comparison, my understanding of real numbers or real data and real jobs is real clear. And that is, if this president is not reelected, the market will crash and the jobs will be gone, because we've seen that already under Joe Biden.
How concerned are you, though, about who might take the blame from voters for lack of agreement on another big coronavirus relief package?
Well, it's pretty clear right now that if Congress is going to continue to play politics with people's lives, then the president is going to do what's right to ensure the American people have money in their pockets to pay rent, to put food in their stomachs and clothes on their kids' backs. He's done it before. He'll do it again. And this isn't the first time Nancy Pelosi has blown up a deal to protect the American people. She did this early on in the coronavirus pandemic, in which there was a deal struck between the White House and the Senate. I was at the White House at the time, and then Nancy Pelosi came in and said, no, I want to tack on all of my Green New Deal socialist agenda items. That's why you see the word cannabis in these deals more than you see the word jobs. The American people understand when this president stepped to the podium and said, we're going to now make sure with an executive order that I'm going to move funding around so that you can have the necessary money needed to continue to live your lives, to continue your well-being. And then the Democrats' response is, I'm going to sue the federal government to make sure the American people don't get that money. If you want to be on that side of it, Democrats, be my guest. But the American people are going to understand and know that it was Donald Trump who was looking out for their future and not the Democrats.
The conventions are finally upon us, not looking anything like they would have been planned to look like, thanks to the pandemic. How much does that matter, that you're not having all the big rallies and that it isn't going to be a normal convention either?
It does matter because, I think the American people, they expect to see their candidates out there, being pressure tested by the mainstream media, taking tough incoming, talking to the American people, letting them ask tough questions as well. And we're not seeing that because of COVID, as you mentioned, this quarantine, these shutdowns. The virus is still here in many ways, and so conventional campaigning isn't a thing right now. So one of the issues at the campaign we've tried to do is make sure our online presence is second to none, is the envy of the political world, and that has actually happened, and that's a good thing. So it's pretty clear that all of the momentum, the excitement's on our side, and so without that, you would also expect the American people to see these debates. Those are upcoming. One of the issues we've had with that is the schedule's so late. It's a 1980s schedule for a 2020 election. And so by the time the first debate happens, you're looking at 8 million people with the potential of voting in 16 states. We want to move that debate up so that the people can get a chance to see these two men outlining their visions for the future of this country side by side. And we firmly believe the uplifting, unifying, patriotic message of this president, America first, America one for all, compared to Joe Biden's America last and crazy socialist ideas, placating to China, that's going to be a problem for them. But if we're not going to see that debate, at that time, it's still okay because, as I mentioned, the campaign apparatus we've built here is so massive and so ready and so energized. This VP pick, quite frankly, energizes us even more, and we're excited to move forward.
Trump campaign National Press Secretary Hogan Gidley, thanks very much for your time.
Thanks so much. Have a great day.
This is Charlie Hurt with your Fox News commentary coming up.
Nancy Grace has been doing what she does on TV since 1996, talking about crime, analyzing cases, and fighting for victims' rights. She was a prosecutor in Atlanta before that, handling sometimes violent crimes, saying she was drawn to that career because of her fiancé's murder in 1979. Her new documentary on Fox Nation is called American Kidnapping, Finding Elizabeth Smart.
This is Jeff Ross. He's with the FBI.
How you doing?
Detective Parks.
Get thee behind me, Satan!
I'm not Satan, and I'm right here.
That's Salt Lake City Police Detective Courtney Parks interrogating the man now in prison for life for the kidnapping, Brian David Mitchell. Nancy Grace spent a lot of time covering the Elizabeth Smart kidnapping.
I remember Elizabeth Smart's kidnapping like it was yesterday. The shock. Now, at that time, I didn't have children. Now I do, and it makes it even more difficult for me to take in the thinking of someone who would invade your home in the middle of the night in order to steal your child. That the thinking is not that any of them are good, but when your child is, walking around a mall without you there, or around a playground, or they're biking or hiking, and they're kind of out there in the public where people can see them, that's bad enough. But to think someone would sneak into your home while you're lying in bed asleep, physically just, 30 feet away from them, and take your child, I remember how fantastical it was. And in cases where children go missing from home, of course, the first place you look is at the parents. But when I looked at Elizabeth's parents, no way. When I listened to them, no way. They were, the pain was just so apparent when I looked at them. Their words were so, it just hurts to hear how much they were hurting. And so that left me trying to figure out and analyze the clues left behind.
Well, and of course, these every parent's worst nightmare kind of kidnappings are exceedingly rare. From a home, of course, but even from a mall or whatever. So, of course, you start with the parents, and then you broaden your circle out to, exes or friends, neighbors, people who may have done work in the home. Who ended up doing this?
Of course, it had nothing to do with the Smarts, as I suspected after I first heard them begging for her return. It was Brian Mitchell and his crackpot wife, Wanda Barzee. May they both rot in hell.
Did he, just refresh my memory, it's been a while.
The mom, thinking she was doing a good deed, brought in a day laborer.
That's right.
To pay him for work on the home, to try to give somebody a helping hand that needed a job. So she brings Mitchell in to do some work at the house. He sees the house, he sees Elizabeth, and it's a done deal. He targets her and comes after her and gets her.
I remember very well also being in the newsroom the morning it was announced that she was found. And you don't get that very often.
No, and it hurts me to say that. I cover on Fox Nation and Sirius and our podcast. Oh gosh, I can't even tell you how many times a week a missing child. And as I'm reporting it, I'm begging people to call in tips to help find the child. But I know in the back of my mind, there's not going to be a good outcome. And I hate it. And I always believe, you're going to laugh, I always believe. The other night, I started crying. And my husband said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "This little girl has been found dead." And he said, "Did you think there was a chance she would be found alive?" I went, "Yeah, I did. I always think there's a chance they're going to be found alive." So you're right again. Statistically, when a child is taken by a stranger, there's usually not a good outcome.
Elizabeth Smart's story and the story of her kidnapping, I assumed, had been pretty well told. What's new in this documentary?
Oh, you know what? Number one, Wanda Barzee has walked free. Yes, she's free. She was released. And it gets me so distraught. But the more we look at the crime and the more we look at the way it happened, we find out more and more and more details. Now, let me just say, praise God. And I know in the media business they don't like to hear that kind of thing, but I'm just saying, praise God. Elizabeth was found alive, and she has gone on with her life. But, as a crime victim myself, people use the word closure or go on with their life. And, yes, we do. But I always say there's no such thing as closure because violent crime affects you the rest of your life. I always say it's like you break your arm and you never get it set. But you learn to make a pancake.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the same way. You can't flip it in the air. You go on with your life, but you're never the same. So we learn a lot as time goes by about Elizabeth, about the effect it's had on her and her family. And in my mind, justice has been denied because Wanda Barzee has walked free.
What do you think of her? What was her relationship with Mitchell? I mean, was she any kind of a victim, or was she just as guilty as him?
She's just as guilty as him. And yes, she may have been afraid of him, but that does not excuse what happened to Elizabeth and her role in it. They were out in public at times with Elizabeth. All she would have to do is ask for help. But she stood by and let Elizabeth be brutalized for months, just treated worse than bad people would treat an animal. And this beautiful girl was mistreated, and Wanda Barzee stood by and let it happen, and even aided, abetted, encouraged. Yes, she's guilty.
Speaking of women in general accused of aiding and abetting horrible acts, you have this. It was the Smart special on Fox Nation. You also have a Ghislaine Maxwell special on Fox Nation that isn't too old. If we can just talk about that for a minute. Do you think she's going to sing? Do you think she's going to sing? Prosecutors have all the leverage here. What does she gain from not talking and spending maybe her life in prison?
You know what? The way you phrased that question, you're absolutely right. She is going to give up evidence, although let's think about it for a minute. What does she really have? Yes, I know she's got a lot, but let's think this through. If she's claiming to have videos and photos of wealthy, powerful, or influential people having sex relations with minors, it's my understanding that when Epstein's Manhattan townhome was raided, they found a lot of that in his safe or somewhere on the premises. If they've already got that, what can she really give them? I mean, she'd have to give me a lot before I cut her a deal. I'm telling you. But do I think she will? Yes. Yes. I think they've got the goods on her because of the victims. They're speaking out, and they're totally implicating her as recruiting them, schooling them, grooming them, even taking part in their molestation. That's sick. She needs to go to jail and stay in jail. She doesn't need to see the light of day. And I really can't believe she's whining about her conditions behind bars, because the girls that were molested have been sentenced to a lifetime of remembering the molestations. That aside, yes, I think she'll give information, and it darn well better be good for the feds to cut a deal with her. Yes, I think she's implicated because so many victims have implicated her. Not just one. It's not just one person's word against her word. It's several. What, are they all lying in order to frame a woman they've never met? I don't think so. But there's no description like a first-hand description. So let's just see what Miss Maxwell is going to give up before we rush to cut a deal with the devil.
Well, and we're only talking about her because of all the money and the luxury involved. We're not talking about her if she's the girlfriend of some poor guy we've never heard of who...
I do. I don't know about you, but I do.
Well, of course. Well, that's your job. I mean, the public doesn't know about...
It's not my job. It's my calling. And it means a lot to me that we represent all crime victims. But I have to agree with you yet again. I think a lot of the fascination with Ghislaine Maxwell is her wealth, her pedigree, her education, because you're right, and the public is right. It's an aberration. You don't normally see a sophisticated, highbrow, well-educated millionaire, female of all things in that scenario, charged with sex trafficking of children. Yeah, that doesn't pop up every day. You're right about that. Again, man, you're scoring 100 on this test. You're right. I think, and it's just like, why? Why? Because she has everything that everybody else seems to want. the money, the connections, the home, the clothes, the parties, blah, blah, blah. Why would she do this? I don't know. You know what I think? I think it's because she loved Epstein. She wanted Epstein in her life, and this is what she did to make that happen.
Nancy Grace, here with us in the Fox family on Fox Nation. Her latest documentary, American Kidnapping, is Elizabeth Smart's story. There's a director's cut of there on Fox Nation now. Nancy, it was good talking to you. Thanks. Thank you so much.
Bye, friends.
Getting Schooled is a podcast hosted by Fox Nation's Abby Hornacek. Each week, Abby and her expert guests tackle topics we take for granted and help explain the roots and meanings behind them. Subscribe and listen now by going to foxnewspodcasts.com. America is listening to Fox News. Rate and review the Fox News Rundown on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen.
It's time for your Fox News commentary.
Charlie Hurt.
What's on your mind?
Defund city police departments, exploding murder rates, free health care for illegal aliens, crushing debt, obliterate American history. For Democrat politicians, the era of American exceptionalism is over. Welcome to the land of shelter in place. The fear-mongering and demagoguery is enough to choke a mule. At least it would choke the mule that symbolized the old Democrat Party, even the Democrat Party of just a few elections ago. These people today, they've gone plumb mad. The inmates have taken siege of the asylum. Senator Mazie Hirono, Hawaii Democrat, stormed out of a committee hearing rather than denounce the fascist domestic terrorist group calling itself Antifa. The loose-knit, violent mob has been implicated in firebombing police stations and federal buildings, attacking peace officers, including blinding 4 cops with laser pointers, and violently assaulting innocent citizens. Yet, Democrats such as House Judiciary Committee Chairman Gerald Nadler dismissed the mayhem caused by these anti-American terrorists as a myth, despite reels and reels of video evidence. Mr. Nadler is the highest-ranking House Democrat on matters of the judiciary. Ms. Hirono is on the actual committee that chooses federal judges, the very black-robed men and women who met out life and death decisions for regular, tax-paying citizens of this country. So much for equal justice under law, or justice in any form other than mob justice. Terrifying. But this is what happens when an entire party is hijacked by fascist mobs who govern by Twitter. They blot out any dissent, first on social media, then in the streets, where their preferred weapons are brass knuckles, ropes, and Molotov cocktails. The only response from Democrat Pauls in Washington is to condemn law enforcement, accuse police of being the fascists. Remember President Obama? Remember 2008? That was a different time, a different campaign. It was hopeful. He at least pretended to love America. He denounced divisions between red America and blue America. Not that he governed like that, but at least he was wise enough to know he could never get elected peddling any of the crazy nonsense these Democrats today are slopping out. That is why President Obama chose to be Joe Biden's political protege in the 2008 campaign. But poor Joe Biden today, he is either too dumb or too out of it to realize what his party has become. Again, Barack Obama would never have run on a platform like this. But forever leading from behind, Mr. Obama endorsed his first wave of Democrats running in New York this year. Among those Mr. Obama hilariously endorsed is Jamal Bowman, a socialist community organizer who already beat longtime sitting Democrat Congressman Eliot Engel for the Democrat nomination over 3 weeks ago. Talk about leading from behind. Among those Mr. Obama did not include in his list of endorsements was sitting Congressperson Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the freshman member of Congress who is leading her party's circus off the cliff into the arms of Antifa. Maybe Mr. Obama worries that Mrs. Ocasio-Cortez is too radical for his brand of politics. Or maybe he's just jealous. Charlie Hurt, Washington Times.
You've been listening to the Fox News Rundown. Stay up to date by subscribing to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com. And for up-to-the-minute news, go to foxnews.com.
Love Fox News? Click the subscribe button to get more of the news and opinion you trust. And click the Fox News Rundown playlist for the latest episodes.